Alright, in this final lesson we're going to go ahead and create a 3D track. Now a 3D track is something that you have to do at the last minute after using such techniques as 2D and planar tracking techniques, and you have to go ahead and do a 3D track. So we're going to go ahead and reuse this lens undistort because the following footage we're going to use uses the same millimeter lens, which is the 14mm prime that we did on set. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to go ahead and hit R for read, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in the shot number 2 DNG raw. Click on it. Obviously we have sequence turned on, and hit open. And I'll go ahead and put my viewer to it. And I'll put my viewer to the lens undistort, so you can see that we now apply the same undistortion to the footage. And I'm going to go ahead and set this to input. I'm going to hit my middle mouse scroll wheel out, roll it out. You can see that gray area is the actual in and output area. So I'm going to come over here, click and type the letter I. Come over here, click and type the letter O. And then I'll just move these cursors like that to make the in and out point. So this scene is a little bit unique because the antique sign actually goes off camera here in the shot. So in that specific circumstance, a planar tracker would not be the best robust way of doing this. A 3D tracker would actually be great. And again, what that's going to do is we're going to put a whole bunch of dots, like 2D trackers, all over this image, and we're going to use that information for each frame and triangulate all those points to recreate the movement I did on set here in Orland Park. It's going to recreate the camera, and by typing in the millimeter information, it's going to totally rebuild the entire camera in the computer. Absolutely amazing technology that you can take a 2D image and create a 3D camera. Okay, so let's go ahead and type in tab and type in camera tracker. Plug in the source. Now it's important to note that there is this masking option here, which if you created a roto here and plugged it in, you could animate a very loose roto around a person that's walking through the shot, or a bird going by, or a piece of the tree that might be moving. It's best to have whatever you're tracking not moving so that it doesn't throw off the track by having trackers that are kind of not moving. Although Nuke is very, very good at figuring out how to solve issues like that, even if there are some weird moving artifacts. If I come over here and you can see this option right here, the input range, that's what we have for the input of the image, which is frame 662 to 675. You can also come in here and make a custom range if you wish. Camera motion, you have 4 options. Rotate only for tripod shots, which obviously have no Dutch movement where the camera sort of rotates to the side or to the left. A free camera, which is a moving shot, which is our shot. Linear motion if you're on a dolly track. And planar motion if you're on like a dolly track on wheels that can move in a planar direction. I'm going to leave it at free camera. Lens distortion, we already took the lens distortion out, so we're good. The focal length has a couple options. You can hit known, and we do know this to be a 14mm lens. But I'm going to go ahead and put unknown constant. Because, oops, I'm sorry, not unknown constant, but approximate constant, and 14mm, because we did zoom up on the footage. So if I look at this lens distortion node, we zoomed up a little bit. The millimeter lens is going to be more like 15mm and not 14mm. So I don't want to like strong arm the computer and have it forced to create a calculation that doesn't exactly fit perfectly. So I'm kind of hinting at the computer, but it's going to do most of the work for me. But giving it little hints as far as what this is all about is fine. You can even do a unknown constant, and it'll still figure out the millimeter lens of this. So it's a pretty amazing. The film back is the actual sensor size, and if you go online and look up on Google the camera that you use to shoot with, you'll see an actual millimeter for the actual size of the actual sensor. And in our case, if I hit my little presets here, I can find a preset, which is Blackmagic Production Camera 4, which is what we shot with. And here's the millimeter sensor size. Okay, so now we have all that. We're going to track this. Now, you could track this 1:1, but I'm going to track this 2:1 to actually get a faster track. And again, the resolution, again, is a little bit lower, but I'm not too worried because it's still going to do a pretty decent job as far as tracking. It's going to take half as long as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and hit the track button. And track it through. Now I forgot one step, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. And I'll go ahead and say clear tracks. And that is to come over here to the settings and turn on preview features. So here you can see, if I go ahead and bring down my viewer exposure here, all the points that it's solving or trying to track will eventually track when you actually do the actual camera track. But I might want to have more points than that, so I'm going to put the number of features up to 300. And then you can play around with the feature separation. So if I kind of just left mouse drag this number 2 here and use my middle mouse scroll wheel, you can see as I bring it down to 1, these are a lot closer and bunched up. Now, that's not what you want. You want to get a good spread of points. So usually 12 is pretty good. And that's usually just a pixel distance radius-wise. And then detection threshold, if you find that it's very hard to pick up on tracking points, you can make the sensitivity so you'll get more points. But you can introduce more error-heavy tracks, so usually the default is fine. So I'm going to turn off preview features, come over to camera track now, and now we're going to do our track. And just let it go. So obviously this is where you're going to go get a cup of coffee. What it's going to do, it's going to track the points all the way across and all the way back. You can already see, or you can feel it as if you're in a room that's completely dark and you couldn't see anything, but you had a series of glow-in-the-dark golf balls in the room. If you, as a practically blind person, you know, but only seeing the golf balls, were to walk through the room, you'd start to see the balls moving past you and behind you, and then you would start to feel out the 3D space just by reference of where all those little glow-in-the-dark golf balls are. That's what the computer is going to do. It's going to take all these points that are moving past the camera, triangulate them, and create the movement of the camera with the understanding that this camera itself, okay, actually has lens distortion, so things will move a lot quicker along the edges. And in general, it's going to be really, really, really accurate because this computer software is just amazing. So again, I'm going to just go ahead and come back. And it looks like we had an error problem here. You can see the tracks are getting goofy here. And this I have rarely ever seen before, but it does come up. And the problem that's happening there is because I set this to 2 to 1. There are some bugs in Nuke that actually can have this issue. So I'm going to go ahead and turn pause off. I'm going to say clear tracks and hit yes, so we can start from scratch again. And I'm going to go ahead and track this at 1 to 1. I found there is some weird errors when you go 2 to 1. It could be video card errors, maybe specific to my computer, but if you have any issues, you want to switch over to 1 to 1 and go ahead and track. So I'm going to go ahead and track again here. You might not have this issue. And it looks like it's going to be a long, long ride. And you'll get an estimated time here. It looks like, oh, I don't know, it's probably going to go up to like 3 minutes. So if I just scrub down here, you can see it's saying 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Once again, it's going to go all the way through and all the way back. But you kind of get the idea here, right? If I were to bring down the brightness here of the scene, you could see that this feels like you're going through a star field. But because the parallax of points moving past you that are close to you and points sort of staying static in the background that are not moving, you're getting that sense of 3D space, and that's what the computer does to solve the actual scene. So I'm going to go ahead again and just hit pause, and we'll wait till this is finished. Okay, so as you can see, we have all these little squiggly lines, and again, these are basically not established other than they're just points right here. You can see they're all in an amber kind of orange color. We have to actually do the solve next, so I'm going to go ahead and hit solve. And immediately you start to see an anomaly of 3 different colored items here. You have these guys right here, which are the unsolved, which are amber colored. They have no information on them. And then you have red and green tracks. The red ones you can see have very high error rates, so error rate of 5.93. And the green ones are good. They have a low error rate of 1.38. The average error rate per frame and so forth should be basically 2.16. This is the average of the entire scene, and this is the per frame average of 2.165. But usually in the industry you want to go to 1.0 or lower. So some of these points actually work against the solve. The red ones and the green ones currently are involved in the solve. But the actual red ones can work against your solve and introduce artifacts such as jumping or drifting or some weird artifact that just kind of throws off your parallax or your solve itself. So we have to get rid of those guys. So I'm going to go over here to Auto Tracks. I'm going to click on Air Max and Max Air. Again, I like to hold down Control when I do this. So I'll click here and hold down Control and click here, or Command if you're on a Mac. So you can see we have this limbo bar. You guys have played limbo before where you got to go under it. Anything above this line is going to get cut from the actual scene if I decide to hit delete rejected, which is anything above this line is rejected. Anything below this line is fine. So if I take my max error, bring it down, you can see that we're starting to call all of these points, right, to the point where we're losing everything. So if we only do this, we're going to delete all these tracks that are red, and we'll be left with very little. So it's a balancing act to still have a good spread of green tracks, but not have too many red tracks that might throw off your solve. So if I take my max error down to, say, 5.6, and I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to hit delete the unsolved. That's these amber tracks. They're useless. They're not doing anything. So I'm going to click here. Hit yes. Now I'm going to say delete rejected. So all those tracks you can see were called or cut off. I'm going to have to re-update my solve. So I'm going to come over here to the camera tracker and say update solve. And now my error rate is a little bit lower. It's about 1.35 or frame 1.19. So that's pretty good. If you're working in the industry, like when I worked on the Sam Jackson Capital One commercials, we wanted to be at 1.0 or lower because we just had to have a perfect solve. It was a major television commercial and we didn't have any room for error, especially when you get to post-production and you have to backpedal, which is not a good idea. You want to make sure your track is very solid at the beginning. Okay, so the export is the final part. We're going to go ahead and choose scene. So I'm going to hit export, scene, say create, and there you go. You're going to get this little kind of triangle here of information. You got the camera node. So if we click on camera and we go to projection, you'll see it's solved for 14.8 as our focal length. So it actually took in that whole zoom in as I talked about before, right? So we had this and then we zoom in. And that's because it's moving the millimeter lens a little bit closer to 15, so you're going to get a little bit more. And again, I'm not going to strong arm my computer. I'm going to let it solve for what works the best, and this is probably more accurate than anything. So with that said, we can go ahead and take a look. We have this camera tracker point cloud, and then this camera. So I'm going to put my viewer to the C node. That's going to immediately pop me into 3D view, and you can go back and forth between 3D and 2D view by hitting tab up here. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at what we got in our scene. To move around in here, as we mentioned before, you want to go into your Edit Preferences, and you want to make sure under Panels, under Viewer Handles, you have your 3D control type set to Maya, or whatever program you like, preferably, to move around 3D. I like Maya, and Maya's controls are Alt and left mouse button to tumble around, Alt and middle mouse button to move up and down, left and right, and Alt and right mouse button to zoom in and out. If I scrub through my scene, you can see the camera moving through the shot. And you have these tracker points. So what are these? Well, every one of those actual solve points has been given a point in 3D space, and it has been assigned a little cube with a color data taken from the original plate shot. So you can see it generally has the color of the antique shop in here. You got some grays and browns and so forth. And if we take a look, you do kind of see the shape of the antique shop. You can take the camera cloud point here and bring this down pretty small, or you can bring it really big. You'll start to notice if you look at this, the orientation of the scene is off a little bit. It's sort of pointing down or something. But you can see what looks like the sidewalk, right? Here is the street, right? And our sign is most likely over here somewhere. So it's recreated the movement of what I did on the day when I was walking around my hometown of Orland Park in here, which is amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Okay, so with that, we're going to orientate our scene. By the way, you can also look at different views here. The four keys on your alphanumeric keyboard, Z, X, and C, which is in the bottom left-hand corner, is your different views. So I can hit X, okay, which goes to the front. Or I'm sorry, Z, which is to the front. And then X, which is to the right side. And C, which is the top. You can also hit Shift-Z for the back, Shift-X for the left side, and Shift-C for the bottom. And then, of course, 3D is the letter V, which is actually one letter over. So that's actually the 3D perspective camera, as you can see. So let's first off orientate this scene. So commonly what I'll do, first off, and if you want to look through the camera, you can click here and click on the camera. And now you can see if I hit play, I'm in the scene here. But you can see I'm kind of like, there's some weirdness going on. So I'm going to lock to the camera. So I'm going to choose the camera and click this little button here. It looks like a camera. Now I'm physically locked into the camera itself, and I'll hit play, and you can see what we're talking about here. The camera has done a beautiful job of recreating the actual solve. It's just absolutely beautiful. You got that bounciness for me moving around, and it's probably accurate, but we have to make sure that it's accurate. And the way you kind of verify that is you can take your lens undistort node. You can go ahead and hit the letter 1, or number 1. And then you can put your scene 2, or scene 1 here, set that to 2. And now we're going to incorporate our little SlapCom tool here. So I'm going to use scene 1, click stack over my actual lens undistort. So again, scene 1 over lens undistort. And again, I have my camera locked to my camera, which is important too. And now if I scrub, I can get a live feedback. So I can go ahead and actually hit play, and you can start to see the playback. And it's important to cache this and see if you're getting any drifting or weird sliding. That tells me that your solve isn't working really well, and you're going to have to resolve. But I'm pretty confident that this is looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it be. Now we want to orientate the scene. As I talked about before, I'm going to hit the letter Z, right? You can see a slight slant at the bottom. And from the side view, it does look kind of weird. It's not orientated correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and put my viewer back to the camera tracker node. I'm going to hit tab to go to the 2D mode right here. And I'm going to double click the camera tracker node, so I'm back with all these points. I want to get out of this actual SlapComp mode, so I'm going to go ahead and click here and hit this little dash button, and then put my first viewer here back to my camera tracker node. So here we are back with all the squiggly lines, and I'm going to go ahead and get to the beginning frame here, where I have a series of points at the bottom, which I know is the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and do my best to grab as many of these points as possible by holding down Shift, because I know this is technically the ground. Grab this guy too. So those points are considered to be on the plane that is the ground, or at least in this case the street. It's important to note that streets and sidewalks are never perfectly flat. There's always an incline so that the water will recede and then head off to the sewage pipeline, so to speak, or not the sewage but the water lines. And in the midst of all of that, nothing in this world is perfectly flat. There's always going to be sort of like a little bit of a change. So I've grabbed all these points. I'm going to right click and choose ground plane, set to selection. And what that's going to do, it's going to connect all these points together and then use that as the flat surface of the ground. So if I go ahead and take a look now, those points are now all roughly averaged to be the flat ground. And now you can see it's orientated correctly. Now in the top view, as you can see here, our scene I would like to have parallel to the street. So here's the street, and we can rotate it if we want. So there's a lot of things we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and hit tab, go back. I'm going to make this point right here my actual 0 mode, or my origin. So I'm going to right click on it, ground plane, set origin. That point, if I go ahead and look at the top view, is now set at the origin. And physically, just basically took the scene and just moved it over so that that point is basically there. Last but not least, we're going to go ahead and rotate this. So we're going to go back into that slap comp mode. So I'm going to go ahead and click my lens undistort, and then I will click my scene node. I will choose scene 1, stack over lens undistort, and look through my camera and lock to it. And I'll just back up with my middle mouse scroll wheel. You can see our scene is properly set up, but I need to change the rotate Y. So inside the camera tracker node, under the scene node, you have this rotate. So I can actually rotate each axis, and I can manually translate as well. I'm just going to take the rotate Y and rotate my scene until this line is parallel with the actual street. There we go. So now we actually have a good orientation. At this point in time, if you were going to go into Maya, you would actually do what's called a RightGeo Node. This only works if you have a paid education version or a full version of Nuke, by the way. If you have the non-commercial version, you will not be able to do this. So you can actually write out by plugging your scene or your camera the actual option to execute this and bring it in. So usually you execute this as an FBX, you put the file in, and you can write it out. So that's for a further lesson. So with this all set up, you can see we have a nice camera solve, and we're going to go ahead and jump in and create a piece of floating geometry that matches with the actual 3D space of where this antique sign is at. So what I like you to do usually is take my camera tracker points. I'm going to hit D to disable it because I don't want to see that ugliness. And I'm going to go ahead and get out of this slap comp. So I'm going to put this to minus, put this back to lens undistort or whatever. And let's go ahead and use a model builder node. So I'm going to go ahead and type model builder. And the model builder has a couple of options here. We're going to plug in the camera. And then the source footage is actually going to be what we tracked, which is the camera tracker or lens undistort. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. Make this look nice and neat. There we go. So if I put my viewer to the model builder node, and make sure you're locked to the camera, otherwise you won't see these little options here. So make sure you are locked to the camera. Now you will see these options here. So I'm going to go ahead and click here and choose a card. You'll get this kind of brown outline here. And I'm going to go ahead and click and drag out an actual plane. So I'm going to go ahead and orientate this to these corners here on my antique sign here. There we go. Because we're going to be replacing this sign. So I'm going to go ahead and put that right there. There we go. You'll start to see a purple dot on top of a yellow dot. As the purple dot gets closer to the yellow dot, that means you're probably going in the right direction. As it gets further away from it, as you can see here, the computer's telling you, no, that's probably not right. What I'm trying to match is this yellow line here being parallel to this line, and this yellow line here being parallel to this line, and this line yellow being parallel to this line. So it takes some time, but it does, does definitely reward you if you just take the time to make it as best as possible here. So I'm going to go ahead and take my time and get this orientated. Okay, so I'm liking that. Probably bring this out a little bit. There we go. So I have a keyframe here at 173, and as I move the camera forward, you can see it kind of goes off the actual antique sign. So what I'm going to do is take any one of these four corners, click, and drag it. It's going to pop basically back to where the sign's at. By coming in here and doing just slight tweaks, we've triangulated from two different positions the actual position of this sign. If I were to jump into my camera view or pop out, you see we have a piece of geometry now in the scene. It is amazing. It has actually taken the triangulation of where the camera was at this position and where the camera was at this position, and by me moving it in a 2D space has figured out where this piece of geometry should fall, which is quite amazing, if I might say so. So I'm going to go ahead and look through the camera again and lock to the camera and just scrub and make sure that that sucker is on point. If he's not, I'll probably do one more key, but usually 2 keys is enough. As long as there's a different enough spacing, or enough spacing here between the keys. So I'll just do one last little tweak there. There we go. All right, I'm happy. It's looking good. Again, you probably want to just hit play and make sure that it actually caches through, but I'm trying to keep this time kind of short for this. Okay, so we're ready to put something on that card. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go get R for read. And I have 2 different JPEGs here. I have new sign low res and new sign high res. I'm going to hit open. I want you to be aware as you choose to, put stuff into your scene that low res stuff is not going to work. Okay, so this sign here is 800 by 1550. If you zoom up, we have some JPEG artifacting, and it just looks blurry. This sign is a little bit cleaner, and it's a higher resolution image, at least in the width. So I'm going to stick with this. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go ahead and come in here, and let's go ahead and crop this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit a crop node and put my viewer to it. And this creates a size by default, the resolution of my image, which is like 4000 by something. So I'm going to go ahead and just crop this image. There we go. And if you want to, again, you can hit Q to hide the overlays and turn them back on again. You want to make sure there's none of that white area. So if you hit A for alpha, you can see we have a nice alpha piece that we can now apply into our scene. Last thing I want to do is add a transform node. Put that right there. And I want to take the transform node after looking through it. There's the pivot point. I'm going to hold down Command or Control and then hold down my left mouse button and set the pivot point somewhere in the center, like that. So I can actually scale it up or move it around and so forth, or rotate it like so. Okay. So in the Model Builder node, with the card selected, I'm going to say Export, select the geometry, hit Baked. That creates a specific card. I'm going to plug that into my Scene node. Okay. And let's go ahead and just move this over here. And the image attached to that will be this wheelhouse. So let's go ahead and look through our scene. And there is our texture put on my scene. So obviously it's not fitting correctly. So if you come to the crop node, there is this little option here called Reformat. If I click on that, it actually will kind of squeeze it into the frame itself that we have. Now we're going to render this out. We're in 3D mode, but we want to physically render this out. So we're going to do that with a scanline render node. So I'm going to hit Tab and type scanline. Scanline render. There she is. And it has a couple options. We need to plug in the moving camera that it's going to render, and the object scene that it's going to render out of. So if I put my viewer to the scanline mode and go here to 2D mode, you can see if I hit A for alpha, we've actually rendered out through the camera motion the piece of geometry as it moves through the shot. It's getting nice lens distortion along the edges, and it keeps moving nicely as it exits the frame. Beautiful. Now, the scanline render node actually has an option here for any type of motion blur. So I can come in here, and as long as my samples are above 1, you can see it actually adds motion blur. And then if I want a lot of motion blur or a little bit of motion blur, I'll add shutter. Always put your shutter offset to center. That's the actual right way of doing it. So you can hit A for alpha. You can see a little bit of kind of ghosting along the edges there. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit Tab and type in Edge for edge blur. And let's put that in. Now, if you take a look now, I have a blurred edge. Hit A for alpha. You can see I got a nice blurred edge there. Kind of help blend it into the scene a little bit more. And now we're just going to overlay this on the original plate. So I'm going to hit M for merge, and then A for a top, and B for background, which is going to be my lens undistort. I'll go ahead and hold down Control or Command and make a dot node and keep this nice and clean. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. And voila, we have a new sign, which is really cool. Now the color on this is a little bit too saturated. Any color correction, I'm probably going to do way at the beginning here. So I'm going to go ahead and type in a saturation node. And let's desaturate that baby. It's too saturated. There we go. Let's go ahead and grade it. Add a grade node. And again, just looking at it letter for Y here, and I'll bring up my viewer. Let's bring up viewer exposure. You can start to see that its blacks are a little too black, so I'm going to take the blacks and actually, let's just go back here. It's actually not too bad. Let's kind of wash out the blacks. Kind of dull down the whites. Not too much. There we go. Gamma, maybe bring it down a little bit. And gain, probably darken it a little bit. There we go. It's also slightly out of focus, so I can usually do a defocus node. You don't want to use a blur node. Defocus is what you want to do if you want to kind of have that defocus look. So see, by adding defocus by 1 pixel, it's just blurred just a hair, like so. And finally, you want to add some grain, because the background image, as you can see, if I use my arrow keys, left and right, there's a slight noisy color grain in there. So I'm going to go ahead and use a grain node. We commonly use these Furnace Core plugins with regrain, but I just want to show you the grain node really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and grain this stuff. And, oops, it's giving me an error message because it has no alpha. So what I want to do is give this an alpha. In fact, I'm going to take this grain, I'm going to take it out, Shift, Control, and X, pop it out. Let's put the grain in after the edge blur. There we go. Let's take a look at what we get. See that greeniness? I'm going to take the size and keep the intensity relatively down, just so we have some sort of noise in there. See my arrow keys back and forth. I'm going to bring up the intensity here. This is a quick way of doing grain. You usually do it by going into each individual channel. So for you professional compositor out there who's going, what are you doing? Don't worry, we're going to get into that. I'm just adding a little bit of intensity of the grain because it is pretty intense here. It's very noisy, colorful noise grain. So you're getting some kind of noise in there and so forth. Now, with that all said, oops, make sure that grain node right there. There we go. With that said, you can see that this is the undistorted. Your client is not going to accept this. They want the original footage that has the barrel lens distortion. So the way that we do that, and still by maintaining quality, which not having to resample things, is we're going to put the B input to the original footage, and then the A input needs to be undistorted. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to move my grain and my edge blur over. And if you recall in the previous lesson, we take the lens undistort node, we copy it, we paste it, we rename it lens redistort. And we turn off undistort, which makes it a redistort node. I'll throw that in right here, and we're good to go. Now, if you see what happens when we get to near the end of the frame here, we get this last pixel being repeated. What's that all about? Well, the scanline render node is rendering the footage, and then the lens distort is squeezing it in, but because there's no information there on the outside, it's just repeating the last pixel. So what do we do to fix that? Well, the scanline render node, as in when you render stuff out of Maya, has to have an overscan, which means you're rendering more data on the outside here. So if I go back to my scanline render node, you can see we're rendering this amount of information. But if I come over here to my scanline render information, I hit overscan, I'm starting to get more data. See, it's actually rendering out more. So I can put this to say 300, and it's going to render the entire sign out here. And as we get to the lens redistort, squeezes it in, we have the information saved. So now, if we take a look at this, we have no issue whatsoever. And the client will be happy because they have the original barrel lens distortion footage and a properly tracked in actual sign here, which is awesome. So here's the full comp in case you guys are seeing me whip around. They're like, well, I need to see it fully here. Just as it is, just so you're kind of not confused. So this is a very quick and dirty example. In the future examples, we're going to be taking this information and bringing it into Maya and rendering out scenes and doing set extensions. I have a whole bunch of classes that I am so looking forward to teaching you guys on really advanced techniques. But you really want to know the basics, and this is a very broad stroke lesson plan. I hope it helps. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me, and I hope to see you in further lessons.